Hello.
How are you?
We're good, Mark. How are you?
Okay. Watching that is oftentimes very sickening to me because this has been an up and down thing. And at the moment, it's a down thing. So, we have to keep fighting. This thing has gone up and down the courts with twists and turns. And that was filmed at a better time in this process than where we are right now. But, we keep going.
Yep, that's right. Sorry, I think something's happening. I think there was a copyright issue with that video. So I don't know. Okay. I don't know what to do.
I don't know what it means.
It says it's automatic if you play certain content.
Oh.
Because it's copyrighted, that video is copyrighted. So I've been struck, which is fine. It's no big issue.
Okay.
But the guys in the chat are telling me that they'll be back. Hi, everyone. I'll just ask. Can you hear or see us? No, they can't hear or see us.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe if we go out and come back in.
Okay.
Stream unavailable. I might have to send you a new link. Beb, just hang 10. I'll message you on X and let you know what we do.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Bye. Okay, hi, can you hear me? Am I on? Just let me know in the comments if you can see and hear me. I think you can. You can? Okay, cool. I'll just get Mark back. Hello, Doreen. I'm so excited that you're here. Okay, welcome back. I think we're fine. Everyone's telling us in the comments that they can see and hear us. So that's fantastic. I'll just double check. Can everyone see and hear Mark as well?
Yes.
Yep, cool. Okay, good. All right. So we'll get started. So I wanted to play that little video that I was obviously, now have at YouTube, my first strike, but that's okay. That's cool. Glad we could fix it and be back. Thanks everyone for coming, and yeah, my gratitude to Mark for coming on tonight, wherever you are in the world. So Mark, I suppose, a lot of the people in that are watching have discovered you because of the Karen Reid case. And, like myself, we follow you around YouTube, and I can't remember which stream it was because there's been so many that I did hear you mention John Giuca's case. And it got me to having a little bit of a look into it, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. I had not heard of it. I'm in
Right.
Australia, so I'm really grateful too that, yeah, I mean, I've been a true crime obsessed person for many, many years, probably over a decade now, and really excited to have you on to talk about that. I guess, I don't even know where to start, because it's been 21 years since Mark Fisher was murdered in Brooklyn, and you have been representing John since 2013. Is that right?
I think 2012 or 13. Yeah. So 12 or 13 years. Yeah. It's crazy. But yes, basically almost half the time I've been a lawyer, including as a prosecutor. Half of it has been dealing with this, trying to undo something that is as unjust as you'll ever see. And, there's been highs and lows, and it ebbs and flows, and we're not there yet, but we'll get there. We've got some stuff to do. And ultimately, I think we're all confident that something is going to happen with John, because this case is a travesty.
Yeah, it really is. And I guess, we could probably talk for hours on end about the case, because I have only scratched the surface of John's case. But I guess we should start with maybe where you're at now with John's case, and maybe work backwards. I definitely would love to hear about how you and Doreen came to meet, and I know that because I've watched and listened to some podcasts. But tell everybody how you came to represent John. I believe Doreen approached you, and I'd certainly love to share an overarching view of why and how John is still in prison today, and the scandal behind Brooklyn DA's office. There's some crossover there, I suppose, with all of the scandal going on at Norfolk County DA's office at the moment.
Shockingly similar. What the Brooklyn DA's office in this time period that we're talking about is the similarities to the current Norfolk DA's office. Very similar. And that's actually one of the reasons why, there's other reasons as well, but that's one of the reasons why I find the Karen Reed case so fascinating, because I think she's getting screwed as well. But what's going on in the DA's office there is flashback to what was going on in the Brooklyn DA's office. The biggest difference between the two, though, is the personalities of the prosecutors responsible. In Karen Reed, you have the
Lally.
most, I don't know what the word is, just uncharismatic, drone-like worker bee, doesn't want any sunlight to come on him kind of guy. Whereas the prosecutor in Brooklyn loved the limelight and tried to actually market John Giuca's conviction as her chief accomplishment in her marketing career, which is now a true crime personality. Many of you probably know her and have watched some of her things. But for years on her resume, the murder, the conviction into the murder of Mark Fisher was her primary selling point. Today, when you look at her clips, you don't see it anymore, because the more attention that is drawn to this, the worse she looks. And that's just the reality of it. But that's the big dissimilarity between the two cases, or the personalities of the prosecutors involved. But I met Doreen in 2012 because I had some very high profile dealings with the Brooklyn DA's office in other cases where they were just a disaster that were out there. I had represented an FBI agent who was accused of committing murder for the mafia that was prosecuted by the Brooklyn DA's office. It was just a stupid decision for them to do. Also similar to Karen Reed. In that case, that's the only other time in my life I've ever seen a large TUI disclosure that everybody talks about in Karen Reed,
Yes.
where the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn gave us thousands of pages of fascinating material to help us. But so that case ended up being dismissed in the middle of trial because it just fell apart for the DA's office. I had a few other things, one of which was featured in a large Village Voice article, which I think I sent you earlier today in one of the clips about an actually innocent guy who was indicted for a violent robbery, and the Brooklyn DA actually indicted 2 people for the same crime, not as co-defendants. They literally indicted 2 people for the same crime, and it was just
And
that
wasn't the first one that was indicted, so the one that you represented, he was in jail for a
he
year
was
after the second.
he
Yeah.
sat in jail for a year, and if you read the Village Voice article, we continued to tell these people, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is an outrage. Eventually, they had no choice but to dismiss that indictment because a campaign was coming up. That man actually recovered a lot of money from the taxpayers in New York due to the incompetence or worse of the Brooklyn DA's office. But anyway, a lot of that stuff, I think, led Doreen to contact me. I think she was looking for somebody who just would take on this Brooklyn machine because they were the worst. Just terrible. Not all of them, but a lot of them, just terrible people. And when she first called me, I knew who she was. I was a prosecutor when this murder happened to Mark Fisher. I remember it. Everybody in New York City remembered what they called the Grid Kid murder case, Grid Kid, because Mark Fisher was a college football player.
Yeah.
And it was just everybody remembered the story of this all-American perfect kid. And he was, by the way, Mark Fisher's a total victim in all of this,
For sure.
who went to, he was from a suburban New Jersey town, never really went to the city, ended up, in Brooklyn, out of his surrounding. And the first night, I mean, it's like every parent's nightmare, his first night out alone in the city, he ended up shot to death on a street corner, or on somebody's driveway, actually. So I also was familiar with what had happened a couple of years before I met Doreen, which was this undercover juror thing, which is something that, again, no one had ever heard of. I mean, it was just absolutely crazy, but you had to have this level of respect for her willingness to do it. And, I listened to the recordings that she made. And if you heard what this juror said to her, you would be appalled that this guy could have sat on a jury. And one might think that a reasonable DA's office, as guilty as they thought John was at the time, would at least be open to recognizing if the jury is tainted, we can't allow that. But before I used to say, forget it, Jake, it's Norfolk County. We used to say, forget it, Jake, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
It started in Brooklyn. So anyway, when Doreen came in, I was skeptical. I just assumed he's a murderer, no reason not to believe it. But, lawyers do what lawyers do. And she came in with a stack of, I can't even tell you how many papers, and just kind of threw them on the desk and said, here's everything. I've been looking and ordering everything. I've got transcripts of this. I got this, that. You're the lawyer. You tell me. And sometimes fate works in mysterious ways. So the very first piece of paper that I picked up on this kind of just pile of whatever on my desk was a transcript from a court hearing, not in John's case. It was captioned, "The people of the state of New York against a guy named John Avito." So, and I just kind of picked it up.
The jailhouse informant, right?
The jailhouse informant, but that's not even what was so shocking at the time. When you get a court transcript, it tells you the name of the case, and it tells you the date, the name of the judge, but it also tells you the name of the lawyers who appears. And in looking at the cover page, it said, "For the people, Anna Siga Nicolazzi," who was John Giuca's prosecutor.
Yeah.
Who
Right.
was appearing on an unrelated, nothing burglary case of a guy, John Avito, who at the time you would just say is a classic mope. He was a drug abusing, low level, spent his adult years in and out of prison, but a mope. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It is what it is. He was just a nothing. And there she was appearing on his case. And this was right around the time while John's case was pending. It was about maybe 2 months before trial.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So let's read this transcript. That's 5 or 6 pages. And, you have to remember, so John's case at the time was pretty much the biggest murder case in New York City, along with a fellow who was indicted named Antonio Russo. There were 2 defendants.
Yes.
And so you flip through this transcript, and what you saw was that the court appearance was what they call a return on a warrant. Okay. And this is another kind of red flag. Wow. That means he was being brought back to court. He had warranted, he had flew the coop, and he, was supposed to show up. And he was being brought back to court by John Giuca's prosecutor. That's not normal. There's nothing illegal per se about it, but she doesn't handle low-level returns on warrants of losers who
that
have
makes sense.
kinds of cases. And then when you started to read the transcript, the first thing you saw was her speak and say, "Can we approach?" Which means I want to talk to the judge privately at the bench without the court reporter.
Sidebar.
Again, you don't, pretty much, basically what you see in Canton or Dedham, yes, a sidebar, whatever. Except these are a little different, but same idea. It's off the record.
Okay.
So something is happening off the record, which you can speculate. You don't know at that moment, but something is weird, right? And then after the off the record conversation, the judge says, "I'm releasing you on your own recognizance. You better show up, da 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 da," or words to the effect of, you're going to go to jail. Now, at this point, even though you don't literally know what's happening, if you do this for a living, you understand fully what's happening. Okay.
Right.
What's happening, and we proved later in excruciating detail, much to Nicolazzi's chagrin, and it gets a lot worse for her in this story. But what was even apparent at that point was that she had found this guy. He obviously, look, he's facing a jail sentence, so he wants to play ball, tells her something. She takes him to court, tells the judge lets him go. And, he ends up testifying as a witness a few months later. That's a benefit. Okay. That is clearly something that could influence him to testify falsely, clearly gives him a motive to, fabricate, because the DA may help him avoid jail. And that kind of thing happens all the time. There's nothing per se wrong with that. But what you're supposed to do is disclose that to the defense, because that's Brady material or Giglio material. Well, it's exculpatory evidence. It's the same idea as what you saw again in Karen Reed. If the DA had the ARCA evidence, same thing. It's favorable to the defense.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll just add, just for those that don't know, this witness that you're referencing was in jail with John.
Right. So I'm going to get to the backstory in a minute. Cool. So they didn't disclose any of that. So now you go back and eventually get involved, and that told me right away there's something here. I don't know where it's going to lead, but my interest was picked right away, because you also have to understand who Nicolazzi was then and who she purports to be now. Okay. She's a true crime guru now. Okay. She is a content creator that many of you may know. That's fine. But her whole marketing thing was, "I am the Brooklyn homicide prosecutor who never loses."
Yeah.
That's how she promoted herself. There are TV shows and videos that you can find now out there. Now, she doesn't do that anymore after all the hearings. I mean, I cross-examined her for 5 days over the course of 2 hearings. You don't see any of this anymore. But the point is, she looked at this in a way where this was an exercise in self-promotion. Okay. Now, did she think he did it? fine, probably. But anytime you have a prosecutor who self-styles themselves as "I never lose," as opposed to "I'm here to do justice, whatever's right or wrong," you should run away and be concerned. All right. And there's a lot more about her as this went on over the years. So, but we started looking into Oviedo, and Oviedo had been in jail with John. Now, this is John got arrested. I remember this because I've heard this sad story probably 30 times over the years. I think he got arrested on December 21st of 2004. He didn't get arrested for over a year. The investigation is a whole nother story. They didn't really know what to do. They changed prosecutors. They changed detectives. A lot of public criticism. Put that all aside. He got arrested walking into his home with an arm full of Christmas gifts, and put the gifts down, put your hands behind the back. That was December 21st of 2004. He has never had a day of freedom since that day. Literally, he has been incarcerated either in jail or prison, even with this case going up and down since that day. And, this is a Doreen story, who's in the chat, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of that. His mother
Yes, she is. I've been highlighting her comments.
Oh, I see it on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if she still does. I assume she does, but that Christmas tree is still sitting up there. She never took it down. So it's kind of just one of those things. But so Oviedo, at the time John was indicted, this is in 2004. There are hard copy newspapers. There is internet, but the guys in jail, they don't really get internet. There's no there are cell phones, but it's not technologically the same type of period. So a guy like Oviedo, who is an opportunist, okay, this is a guy who has been in and out of jail, as I said, his whole life. He's used 27 different names. He warrants all the time. Most of his crimes were crimes of dishonesty, stealing, lying. He's a dishonest person. He's an opportunist. He's the kind of guy back then who was looking out for number one. And the way that any jailhouse informant back then would get information, because they always want to wrap a kernel of truth around their story instead of making it up whole cloth when they want to sell it to a prosecutor. So they would get bits and pieces from when they see TV news, because this case was on the TV news all the time, or when they see it in the New York Post or the New York Daily News, little blurbs. And at the time when Oviedo got to Rikers, the news story was that Mark Fisher had gone to an ATM machine in Brooklyn, left John's house, and went with Antonio Russo, the co-defendant, and that he withdrew money. And then at some point, Russo shot Mark Fisher during the course of a robbery. And the way initially that they tried to link John into this was that he gave him the gun.
Yeah.
But to be clear, at all times, the DA's theory was that John was sitting at home when this happened, and that Antonio Russo actually literally shot and killed Mark Fisher. So Oviedo, though, really couldn't keep the full story straight, whether it was from the heroin withdrawal, hearing bits and pieces. So he claims after he was sitting with John in a visitation room at Rikers, they're at different tables. And John is sitting there with his natural father, okay, and two female relatives, and Oviedo has visitation with whoever. Now, at the time, John's natural father, and this is all documented with medical records that are thousands of pages long. We had them all, presented them all to whoever wanted to see them. He had suffered a series of debilitating strokes. The point being, he could barely talk. He could barely string random words together because, you get a stroke, your speech. So the last thing that he could do is have a full-fledged conversation like we're doing. He just couldn't do it.
Right.
On top of that, two female relatives are sitting there. I think John's cousin, who was a normal girl, and his aunt, who was a banker. I mean, these are normal people, presumably. And so Oviedo claims that he overheard John and his father have a conversation, which I'm telling you is impossible.
Yes,
Absolutely
right.
impossible. In front of the women, which I'm telling you is not impossible, but which is extraordinarily unlikely, to talk about the finer points of murder when your cousin is just sitting there.
Of course.
And he claims he overhears John or his father say, why did you have a gun? Why did you bring a gun? And he claims he heard John say, I just did. I brought it and I just did. Now, this is interesting. He's claiming, in essence, Avito, that John is admitting to his father during a conversation in which a man cannot talk, literally,
Yeah.
okay, that not if this isn't all bad enough, that John is admitting he was out there with Antonio Russo. The theory under which he's indicted is that he's home and had given a gun to Russo and stayed home.
Right.
Avito is, these guys aren't entirely stupid. He knows that if the DA tries to vet his story, they're going to check their visitation records. And sure enough, they're going to show that they had visitation the same day with his father and those women. That they're not that bad.
Sorry.
So Avito then claims he speaks to John when they go back to their cell block. Hey, why didn't you tell me what happened? And he claims that John tells him that he went with Russo and Mark Fisher to the ATM and that Russo had a gun
Mhm.
and that Russo started, taking out the gun on Mark Fisher. This, again, according to Avito, is claiming what John told him. And that John then took the gun from Russo, like grabbed it out of his hands and just started pistol whipping him, beating him and beating him. And that somehow, some way, Russo got the gun back and shot Mark Fisher. And then the two of them left. But so now the witness is coming forward and saying he was there and an actual participant, not only armed, but in the physical violence that ended Mark Fisher's life. He's indicted for giving him a gun under multiple theories, by the way. Now, to be clear, there are no eyewitnesses to this crime. There is no forensic evidence to this crime. There are no credible admissions. The only evidence that is ever presented against John are statements that he allegedly made to Avito and his ex-girlfriend, who's another part of this story, and a couple other people who are part of this story. And each person's version of what they claim he told them does not match the other.
Right.
So, I mean, you have some of them saying he wasn't there, he gave him a gun. You have another one saying that Russo asked him for a gun. You have Avito saying, no, he was there. He admitted he was there and beat him up. I mean, this is who indicts a case like this? Well,
That's
back
right.
then, the answer is the Brooklyn DA's office indicts a case like this. And so what they do, and I mean, we can rewind this in a minute, but by the time they go to trial, they don't use a veto right away. They kind of put them on ice as what I call the break in case of emergency, break glass in case of emergency witness. So Nicolazzi, who again is supposed to be the seasoned, experienced prosecutor who's smarter than everyone else, never loses, and does everything on the up and up.
35 convictions in a row, right?
35-0. And she would literally tell you, it's gross. Okay.
It is.
But in any event, she opens up in front of the jury on the theory only that John was not there and uses the other witnesses, doesn't mention a veto, never alleges that he's there, nothing like that. Now, during the trial, the two witnesses who claim that they were told by John that he gave Russo a gun, they both testified that they were told that in the same meeting with John. In other words, there are three people present in this conversation. Okay. John, his ex-girlfriend, whose name was Lauren, and his former friend named Albert. And Lauren and Albert are testifying what John told them, but they're testifying about the exact same conversation. Okay, does that make sense? They're
It
not
does.
okay, but they tell two different, totally different stories about the exact same conversation and what John allegedly says in the exact same conversation. I mean, this is like kabuki theater nonsense, and it gets so bad that the girlfriend, whose name is Lauren, is cross-examined about the story, and she says Albert is lying. Albert says she's wrong.
Wow.
Albert says, I saw Lauren help him by getting rid of a gun bag. Lauren says, I never did that. You basically had these two witnesses, these are my words, not the way it was presented in court, accusing each other of perjury as prosecution witnesses, and this case is completely going in the gutter. Okay? So what do? Call a veto at the end of trial, break glass in case of emergency.
Right.
And they call a veto, and he comes up and tells this crazy story that John said I was there. And by the time you get to her summation, okay, this prosecutor has turned herself into such a knot, is so intellectually dishonest with the jury that she has now turned her opening statement, which was John gave Russo the gun, into a summation where it doesn't even make sense unless John was there. He had to be there. He had to have physically attacked him. And ladies and gentlemen, he may very well have shot him as well.
Oh, wow.
This is absolutely bonkers. Okay. But when a veto gets cross-examined at trial, he gets cross-examined about his usual life as, a jailhouse informant. You've been convicted of all these crimes. You're basically, for lack of a better term, a piece of garbage. And, you must be looking for something. Now, mind you, his trial lawyer, which is not me, I'm years later. Okay. They didn't tell him what Nicolazzi did in court in telling the judge on his case that he's a witness in a murder case and keeping him out on bail. Okay. The defense attorney doesn't know this. All he knows is that a veto is a criminal. Okay. So the cross-examination of him is what I would call general impeachment. It's just about, you've been convicted of these crimes. You're an awful person, but it's not specific about your motive in this case.
That's right.
But as if
any
this
benefits that
but
have been offered. Yeah.
if this isn't gross enough, what does Nicolazzi do? Have you sought any benefits? No. Have you received any benefits? No. Why are you doing this? Because for once, she says, for once in his life, he just wanted to do the right thing. It is vomit inducing. It was beyond false. It was disgusting. Okay. It was, now the defense attorney in his summation says, this guy must have wanted something. I don't have any real proof, but come on, look at this guy. Where did he come from? And in her summation, because the DA gets the last word, what does the DA do? She says the lawyer is, it doesn't matter how loud he is. He's just blustering and speculating. He can be as loud as he wants. He doesn't know anything. And all Vito wanted to do for once in his life was be, a good citizen. Now, this couldn't
Just
have
decided to do the right thing for a random.
Couldn't be further from the truth. So a funny thing happens years later when you try to unpack this case. And when we filed a motion to vacate the conviction, which for a period of time worked. So you do the research and you find out the day that John Avito went to court with this prosecutor that we talked about a while ago.
Yep.
That was on June 13th of 2005. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Avito had been let out of jail, sometime prior to that. On June 9th, 4 days before Nicolazzi escorted him to court and told the judge on his case what was happening, okay? 4 days earlier, he absconded from his drug program. He just left. He said, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, his plea deal was very clear. If you abscond or screw this up, 3.5 to 7 years in New York State prison, And this is a guy with his record and history would have deserved every day of it, no questions asked. On June 9th, he takes off. Okay. Now he's a fugitive. He's in deep trouble. Okay. That same day, what does he do? He calls the homicide detective that's working on Giuca's case and says, I have information, but I'm like,
Wow.
now this, let's be clear about something else. They later said this guy testified to do the right thing. All right. John Vito got out of jail in February of 2005 into this drug program. He claimed that John told him all this bad stuff and he overheard the father who couldn't speak in February. So early March, April, 4 months earlier.
Yeah.
He never told the cops. But the day he absconded and was facing a lengthy prison sentence and knew he was screwed is the same day that he just happened to call and say, I have information on that huge murder case. So they say, and he's a warrant. You know, again, he's a fugitive. So the detectives say, okay, we'll bring you in. And they bring him in on June 13th of 2005. Do they bring him to court? No. They bring him to Nicolazzi's office in the Brooklyn DA's office, where he says, I have information. And she listens to him. And after this, what does she do? She walks him over to court, and all of that happens. So now here's what's interesting. So when Vito testifies at trial, okay, he's asked about absconding from his program on June 9th and coming back on June 13th, okay? But the lawyer doesn't have the transcript, okay? So he doesn't have this June 13th transcript that's going to have Nicolazzi's fingerprints proverbially speaking all over it, all right? So he's asked, the lawyer's doing the best he can, which is, how did you just happen to, did the cops bring you in? No, went there on my own. You know, he's full of shit, pardon my French.
You're fine.
And so he's asked about June 13th. And he says, what happened? He's asked what happened. And he says, this is at trial now in front of John's case. He says, well, the judge called up the DA and my lawyer, the DA, not ADA Nicolazzi, John Giuca's prosecutor, the DA, unnamed. The jury doesn't hear it's Nicolazzi who's in the courtroom asking these questions. They hear the DA. And he says, I guess the DA spoke to my lawyer and the judge said, I'm going to give you another chance. So now when he says the judge gave me another chance, Nicolazzi, who has just concealed her own identity as the one that went up there, which of course would make the jury realize, why are you on this Mopes burglary case unless there's something going on here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So right after she conceals her own identity as the DA, when Vito says, and the judge, I guess let me go, she goes out of her way and says, not that judge, right? In other words, she's making sure the jury does not get the impression that it was Giuca's judge who let him go, lest they think something's going on here. She conceals her own identity and at the same time makes sure the jury doesn't think anything involved. This is unethical. This was part of the reason why eventually
it's contrived.
It's sick. Okay.
Yeah, unbelievable. Wow.
And it's terrible. And I'll never forget the first time she testified on, when I got to examine her years later, she said it was the DA. It wasn't misleading at all. She had no regret about anything she did at all. Okay. None, nil, nada. She said it was accurate. I was the DA. And you didn't think you were obligated to let that jury know? Nope. No reason, because I didn't do anything. And that was just one example of the things that happened. And, it turns out of these 4 witnesses who testified against him at trial, 3 of them recanted under oath in sworn statements. Okay. They literally, under penalty of perjury, Avito recanted in a series of sworn affidavits. And then, as you saw in the copyrighted video,
Yeah.
testified under oath with the benefit of counsel, by the way, cried on the stand, apologized, and did that. The girlfriend, Lauren, okay, contacted me on her own
Oh,
while this was
you,
on
right.
in the news and said, I want to come in and talk to you. And of course, come in that day. And she sat in my office and, said he wrote me a letter, and I'm married now, and she's a normal person now. She has her own life, her own kids. I mean, this is all a nightmare in her past. She has no relationship with John, no interest in speaking to him, but she said, this is tearing me up. I don't know what to do. I told my husband I don't know what do I do? And
Wow.
so I wanted her obviously to help us. And then she said, but I need to contact an attorney. I'm like, all right, and then you're hoping you don't lose her, right?
For sure.
She got her own attorney. I didn't give her an attorney. She comes back, I think it was like a month or two later, with her attorney, and unloads all of it. Okay. Gives us a sworn recantation, and then proceeds to tell us what the police and Nicolazzi said to her because she denied knowing anything for more than a year. They would call her in and she'd say, I don't know anything. And they just leaned on her. She wanted to go to law school. She wanted to work for the U.S. Marshals. They were telling her, you're never going to be able to do that. They were telling her, just say this. I don't want to get into too much stuff, but, these are Catholic people. Okay. She came from a very Catholic family. They were young people. Things happen. They threatened to reveal that to her family, when, life happens, and unmarried Catholic young couples,
Yeah.
where I'm going
I'm
here.
picking up what you're putting down. Yes.
They,
Yeah.
they threatened to out on that. They threatened to tell her that, when we searched John's house, when he got arrested, we found pictures. You don't want that to get out. Lauren's father at the time had been in his own legal problems. They threatened, about what could happen to him. And she capitulated. She just rolled over and said, fine. He told me that, he gave Russo a gun, and, capitulated to that. So she recanted under oath. Another guy named Anthony, who they threatened him with because he had a DWI and some legal issues. He had a custody battle going. They threatened him because they believe that he got rid of the gun after the crime. They claimed that John gave him the gun. He denied that for a year and a half, but they leaned on him. And so he testified, okay, he gave me the gun. He recanted under oath. Years later, another witness who is not one of the main witnesses, but who testified to this really nonsensical theory that there was this street gang known as Ghetto Mafia, which was really just a bunch of Brooklyn, frankly, upper middle class knucklehead kids, mostly, who called themselves that. But he had testified, oh no, we have this is during the time of The Sopranos. Okay.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, clearly, Nicolazzi and the people in the DA's office watched too much TV, because they were saying, oh, John is the boss of this family. And, Russo was his capo, his soldier, excuse me. And she even said in her opening statement that John was a self-styled mafioso, Tony Soprano wannabe, which, by the way, is offensive anyway. It's not proper for an argument anyway, or even an opening statement, but all this kind of stuff. That guy recanted as well. So there are 4 sworn recantations. The only witness who never recanted has his own issues, which are fascinating. So this was his friend Albert, who they were leaning on for the longest time. And he told them, I don't know anything.
So sorry to interrupt. So it's Albert Cleary, am I correct?
Yeah.
And Mark's body was actually found across the road from Albert Cleary's house.
That's
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
which is interesting too.
Well, I'm going to tell you something about a guy named Albert Cleary and a woman named Angel DiPietro, who
Yes.
probably for the next podcast. This is not an hour and a half, 2 hour kind of thing.
I know. And Angel is now a
Angel was hired by Nicolazzi's office a few years after this case. She lied at trial, and that was easily proven. And the Brooklyn DA's office, because Charles Hines, who was the DA, was very close friends with her father, who was a prominent lawyer, who donated money to Hines, and he hired her. And Nicolazzi and Angel DiPietro became colleagues after this. I mean, this is really sick stuff. But Mark Fisher's family, who are the nicest people, and if you've actually heard me when we talk about Karen Reed say, I understand why the O'Keefes maybe are, the way they are, and I kind of don't pile on to them because I've seen it in this case. I've seen Mark's family, just the horror they go through because they're innocent people in all of this. But to this day, they believe that Albert Cleary and Angel DiPietro were somehow involved. They sued them.
Well, she was because they were together at Albert's house.
They were. They
went there after they were at John's.
They were college friends, and then Angel, after this, just disappeared. Like, they all went to Fairfield College, and she just moved out and disappeared and moved away. But the thing about going back to Cleary, so they were leaning on him for the longest time, and he went out of his way. He hired his own lawyer, okay? And his lawyer went on a publicity tour around 2004 when this was an unsolved crime, saying, leave this kid alone. He doesn't know anything. He's a good guy. They went on the CBS Morning News. They gave interviews, but they did something else. In order to get the DA and the NYPD off their backs, Albert Cleary decided through his lawyer to hire a polygraph examiner. Okay.
Right.
And purportedly took a polygraph and passed. And if you know anything about polygraphs, there are three kind of, on topic questions, and the rest are all nothing to, what's your name? Who's the president? So they know you're not lying, kind of, or not.
Yeah. So they've got a baseline or whatever as well. And
the relevant questions are, if I recall correctly, I mean, we have all this, obviously, do you know anything about, Mark Fisher's death? No, no deception detected. Something about, do you know anything about John's involvement in this? No deception detected. And are you being truthful when you're telling us this? No deception detected. So they're waving around this polygraph, giving it to the DA to show them, leave this kid alone. Okay. Within a couple of months, Albert Cleary was on felony probation and had been kicked out of Penn State University, or Fordham University, which is in the Bronx, for being part of a vicious gang assault. And he was on probation, and they started leaning on him. If you don't play ball, things could happen. So something happened with Albert Cleary. All of a sudden, the guy who passed the polygraph examination decided to say, okay, I'll like Lauren, like Anthony, and I'll tell you what happened, allegedly. And he came up with a different version of what John allegedly told him. And he testified. I don't want to get too legalese here because I don't want to lose people, but he testified in the grand jury that ultimately indicted John. And in New York, if you testify in a grand jury, you get immunity. Okay. Now, again, there were people who thought that Albert might have been involved, not necessarily in a murder, but might have been involved in a cover-up or knew things or help, the murderers, so to speak. Albert Cleary was somebody who did not want to testify. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer went on TV. They got a polygraph. I don't know anything. Not only did he end up testifying in a grand jury, but he waived immunity, which no one would ever do unless the DA is telling you, don't worry, giving him a benefit, essentially, by saying, don't worry, you're fine. His lawyer should have said, if you want him to testify, he will, but I'm getting immunity, and then he's off the hook. So Albert, had his own credibilities as well. So these people testify. They all tell different stories. You have, Albert is saying that Mark Fisher sat on a table and John got pissed off and ordered Russo to go show him what's up and ordered him to execute Mark Fisher, which is silly. You had Lauren who's testifying. Well, Tony Russo said I wanted to rob him. So he asked John for a gun and John gave him a gun in the same conversation. It doesn't make any sense. Then you have a Vito saying, oh, no. John told me he was out there at the ATM, pistol whipping him and shooting him. They throw this all out there. They have no other evidence and he gets convicted. And he's been in prison for this crime all this time.
And so just quickly in regards to the evidence, because Mark was found with a blanket, right? He was found on the sidewalk with was it yellow or green blanket?
Brown tiger blanket, and the blanket did come from John's house. There was never any dispute that all of these young people had a party at John's house. Now Mark left with Russo, and there's a whole, again, there's a lot more detail about this, but the cops, oh my God, that's a blanket. Where did that blanket came from? It was Doreen's blanket. I mean, there's no secret about that. And it was never a big deal. There was never any dispute that all of these kids had been at John's house, as 19 and 20-year-olds do when the parents are away. They hang out, they party, drink a little wine, maybe smoke a little dope, whatever. I mean, that's right.
That's right. And apparently Mark had fallen asleep on the couch or something and then was going for a walk. I don't know if this is factual it was raining. And so did he ask for a jacket and John said, just take the blanket?
Because it was it was October 12th at 6 in the morning, give or take. It was rainy, cool. It's not winter yet in New York. It's not even the heavy fall, but 6 o'clock on a morning in October can be chilly.
Yeah.
So they gave a blanket, and which of course is the last thing you would ever do if you're trying to, murder someone, is give them a key to your house, essentially. But the other thing which was really interesting is, Angel is a whole nother podcast herself. Mark Fisher that night had forgotten his cell phone. Okay.
Right. That's right.
And he went to college with Angel. And when he went to John's house, they had started out in Manhattan bar hopping and they ended up in Brooklyn. The only person he knew at the party was Angel, because they were actually friends in college. And he actually left voicemail messages saying, I'm in Brooklyn, I don't have my phone, I need a ride or whatever, call Angel. And Angel had snuck out and left with Albert Cleary shortly before this crime. And Mark Fisher needed Angel because the voice messages were going to be on Angel's phone. And he went with Russo. And where did he end up? Across the
road from Albert Cleary's house,
where Angel was.
Yeah.
Now everyone in the neighborhood came out when this horrible thing happened, except anybody from. It's like Brian Albert's house.
It's Brian Albert, except it's Albert Cleary and Angel, and so they didn't hear 5 gunshots.
Nope.
They right across the road.
Right under Albert's bedroom where the two of them were, although I'm sure they would deny what they were doing. Nobody cares. That's not important.
No.
No, they had claimed.
And they'd only gone home, an hour or so earlier, right? They'd only
they left
John's maybe an hour prior.
Right.
It's not like they'd been at home for 6 hours and were in deep sleeps.
No. And, it got really interesting because later that day, Albert had never met Angel's family or anything. And they're just kind of casual friends. They knew each other through Angel's then boyfriend went to college, I believe, with Cleary at Fordham until he got thrown out. But later that day, out of nowhere, hours after this happened, Angel, who you have to understand who Angel is too. She's like a Garden City upper class party girl back then. She's not getting her hands dirty kind of person. Okay. But inexplicably, the morning after this happens, the story they give is that Albert and Angel wanted to clean out Albert's garage. Now, they had a car which had been seen, and it gets very interesting. And then they decided that we need to go to Long Island and spend the day on Long Island at Garden City with Angel's father, who I told you is a prominent criminal defense attorney. I've met him before. I know
Wow.
this. They'd never been out there, and they end up spending the whole day out there with her father.
The day after, the day of.
That day, they had to, the cops, when they wanted to interview people, they couldn't locate Angel. And you know how they eventually found her? They just camped out at Fairfield University in the security office and said, tell us when she comes back with her key card. And, you know, when she came back on the long weekend, they did. She was not cooperative with them for a while. She ended up hiring Ben Braffman, who is a like top level New York City legend. Okay, I know him. He's the real deal. This is not I'm just letting you know this is what they were doing. This has nothing to do with him. And the obstruction was on here. I mean, they were clearly, and there's so much more to this that we could.
Oh, there's so much more. Even, you know, I mean, I guess the only other, while we're on to the next day, so his co-defendant, or the other defendant,
Antonio Russo, yeah,
Russo.
who's totally
So
guilty, by the way.
Yes, so I wanted to just talk about him. And while we're on the morning of, or you know, that day,
Right.
what did he do?
Russo,
What did he do? What were his movements hours after Mark Fisher was shot?
Russo, unlike John, I mean, you kind of have to juxtapose the so-called co-defendant killers here, okay?
Yeah.
After Mark
Let's
Fisher
do
was
that.
killed, what John did was stay in Brooklyn, go home,
Well,
go to school.
he stayed home and went to bed, right? He was in bed until
he lived his life, okay? Obviously, the cops suspected people. It was his house. The cops were in and out of their house, giving him a hard time, but he didn't go anywhere, okay? He just lived his life. Now, Antonio Russo, my God. So on October 12th of 2003, Antonio Russo had heavy dreadlocks. Okay. I mean, that was his signature. That if you said describe someone, the first thing you would say is he's got long dreads. I mean, that's what he is. And they knew him, and he was a bad kid, but he lived right behind them in kind of a not nice building in this really nice part of Brooklyn. It was kind of an interesting, but whatever. Russo, this murder happened at about 6:40 in the morning. Okay. On October 12th of 03. At approximately 7 o'clock in the morning, literally 20 minutes after the murder, Russo goes back to his building, which is kind of like a New York City, low-level apartment building. I don't think it's officially like a project, but it's just not a nice building per se, but it's in a nice part of Brooklyn. He knocks on the door of one of his neighbors that he knows. Now, remember, okay, it is Sunday morning at 7 o'clock on a holiday weekend. It's Columbus Day that time. Okay. Knocks on this person's door and says, I need you to shave my head right now. And they're like, and he's like, right now. He was afraid of getting picked up on a surveillance camera with Mark Fisher at the ATM with his long dreads. So 20 minutes after the homicide, Russo has his head completely shaved off. He then, over the course of a few days, is hanging out with some of his other friends and is telling them different versions of things, but is admitting what he did. Okay. And he gets hauled in by the cops because they know who everyone was at the party.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily know he's a suspect, but he shaved his head. The cops are not dumb. And Russo is the one, when he gets interviewed, he does not get arrested, okay, initially, who puts the seed in these cops' mouth and in Nicolazzi's head. It is Russo who says, there's a gang called Ghetto Mafia. And he tells the cops, because he's trying to save his own neck, okay? He basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, it was Giuca and Cleary. Something like that. The cops actually, based on the word of this psychopath, arrest John. And even the DA is like, what are you doing? Cut him loose. You can't. This guy is, what are we doing? John gets released right away. Russo that night gets on a plane and goes to LA. He's out of there for several weeks, I believe. And of course, the cops are also aware of this. He eventually comes back. He starts putting on his wall in his apartment newspaper clippings about this case. He basically builds a shrine and is telling his friends, I did that, kid, and all of
Oh,
this.
no way.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, so after John's conviction, and Russo is like a psychopath, okay? He's guilty as hell. He's been in and out of mental health prisons since this happened. I mean, he is crazy, but not legally crazy. He's a bad dude, okay? But what happens is when John's conviction gets reversed, all right, after his conviction gets reversed, the DA is considering whether we're going to retry this case. Now, Avito is gone. There's no way they're calling him. He's recanted and he's a disaster, right?
Yeah.
All these other witnesses have recanted. They start saying, we're going to call Lauren as a witness. And her lawyer says, absolutely not. She stands by her recantation and she will absolutely testify that she lied at trial. He didn't do this. And, you can't call your own witness for the purpose of impeaching them. They weren't going to have her either. These people were so desperate, they send detectives upstate to interview Antonio Russo. Under the theory, maybe Russo will help us. As if they're so anxious to get Giuca that they're willing to get in bed with this guy. But then a funny thing happens. Russo basically tells him, I did it alone. He didn't do it. I did it.
Wow.
He said it was my gun. He didn't give me a gun. I have my own gun. And he said, I saw a girl and a guy out there. Now, a whole nother thread of this is it has always been our contention that Angel DiPietro witnessed this crime. And that's from the neighbors and other people. And she lied about that and they protected her. And then they hired her as a prosecutor later. And then she left. The heat got hot. And then I think she came back because, this is temporarily over. But
so is Angela currently a prosecutor? For where? At Brooklyn DA's office?
Not Brooklyn. I mean, that ship sailed.
Right.
And, look, I had people in the Brooklyn DA's office privately tell me, we know this is a dirty case. I hope this works out. It's embarrassing that we employed her. I mean, not officially, of course. But a lot of people in that office knew what this was all about. And, if there was ever anything you needed to know about how that office worked at this time. So we tried initially to go to what they call their conviction review unit. And it was the very first case, literally number one, that the Brooklyn DA's office reviewed after they finally threw Charles Hines, who was corrupt to his core, out of office. And the new DA was a guy I knew well, Ken Thompson. He passed away. He actually got cancer and died like real quickly. But his whole thing was, we're going to reform the office and whatever. So they were reviewing this case. Okay. Now, part of the review focused on John's absolute innocence, of course, but also part of it included that Nicolazzi deliberately violated his right to due process by suppressing favorable evidence, eliciting false testimony, and intentionally making false argument. And I will say that anyone who's willing to listen, when his conviction was reversed, the court unanimously agreed. Even when that conviction was reversed in the Court of Appeals of New York, in a very strong dissenting opinion, there was a judge who said, I can't believe we're doing this. She deliberately misled everyone and, violated every ethical rule. But anyway, the point is, for this part of the story, while they were ostensibly reviewing her conduct, she still worked in the office. And they wanted her to go on a TV show, or she wanted to go on a TV show, which at the time was called Did He Do It? And it was her and some defense attorney. And the promotion was, I'm the Brooklyn DA who's never lost a homicide case again. And they allowed her to say, I'm a Brooklyn DA who's never lost a case, use their office, use their platform. At the same time, they were ostensibly reviewing her conduct for this egregious misconduct, and they let her do it, which tells you all you need to know. What a joke the review was, what a whitewash it was, and how remorseless and tone deaf she was. And, if you look her up today, she has her podcast. It's probably very successful. Again, she's the antithesis of Adam Lally. An
Correct.
incredibly good speaker, incredibly stylistic,
Ambitious.
ambitious, but also polished, really good, but just blinded by her ambition then. And she'll tell you it's all about justice and families. Maybe that's part of it, but her conduct in this case is so
mostly
wrong.
it's narcissistic personality traits. Yeah.
Oh, completely. And remorseless. And the only thing, again, that has been accomplished from her standpoint is the murder of Mark Fisher is no longer on her greatest hits. Because if you look up the murder of Mark Fisher, you're not going to see articles saying how wonderful a job she did. What you're going to see is that she suppressed evidence, misled the jury, and you're going to see a ton of stories about her misconduct. So they don't want that.
Right.
They don't want that.
And just for the record, I had never heard of her before looking into John's case. So
she never appeared on any of these shows, and again, after John was convicted, she went on every show to talk about this.
I bet she did. I bet she did.
A year ago, Doreen and I went on the Dr. Phil show about this. We went out to Los Angeles. We went out to LA. And at that time, she was in private, she's not in the DA's office anymore. And she refused to come on. There were other shows on 2020 multiple times. She refused to come on. But when it was about the conviction of this ghetto mafia gangster, front and center. So, if you can't take the heat, you ought to get out of the kitchen. And, instead of defending her conduct, she just tried to disappear and then, pay reputation managers to scrub as much as you can from the internet.
Unbelievable. And so I think it'd be great to kind of know, someone asked before, so what's happening now, what's next, I suppose. But while we're on we're talking about, I'd like to talk about Doreen and D. Quinn. And I know it was before your time, when
does she want to come in? I don't know if she does. I mean, she's here. I don't know
if she wants to come in. I would love to have her.
I don't know if she wants to do that, but Doreen, do you want to tell it yourself?
But the invite's open. I can send you a link, Doreen, if you'd like to, and you can tell the story because
it's before I got involved. So, I know a lot about it, but I don't.
Of course. Yes, that's right. And I think, how it came about, because not only is there prosecutorial misconduct and
totally
witnesses that have recanted and all the other things, convictions overturned and convictions reinstated. But there was juror misconduct as well,
there are so many things wrong. And even after we talked about a veto, there was another hearing years later about another jailhouse informant that Nicolazzi did unethical things with. What are the odds, right? How many times can this happen before you say, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it just might be a duck. Another day.
Another day. I'd love to have you on, Doreen, to tell your story when you'd like to, if you would like to. incredibly inspiring. It was certainly a standout for me when I started to look at John's case. I just literally had my, mouth open the whole time. Like, I just can't believe it. Like, what a woman.
There are a ton of articles about this ranging from the last 15 years.
A ton.
There are numerous videos. I sent you some of them today. So if you, go to your Twitter page, you'll see them there. Or if you just Google this, there's a million, and and some of them are really incredible. There are a few reporters who particularly just broke this down. This Hella Winston, who's a great reporter, a great, at the time, freelance reporter. She wrote incredible stories about this. There were some really strong editorial pieces by a well-known New York City reporter named Harry Siegel, who, is an op-ed guy, or wrote a column at the Daily News and some other stuff. He wrote some really strong stuff. Alan Foyer of the New York Times wrote, after the case was reversed, a lot of stuff there. It's just all over the place.
And I think too, is it freejohngiuca.com?
Yeah.
There's plenty of
well,
of
what we have,
there
are, and if people are interested, I know there are transcripts, there are documents, there are letters, there are decisions, there are exhibits. And this is, if you think it's bad what I'm telling you now, if you actually look and see how awful this is, it is sickening. This thing haunts me to this day. This is so wrong. And the indifference in that office is just disgraceful.
So how long since you've spoken with John, Mark?
I got an email from him today. Not a long one, but it ebbs and flows depending on what you're doing. But ironically, today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I think, look, he's doing well under the circumstances. He's essentially become a college graduate, all A's. But he's doing this in prison. So and he's been to some of the worst hellholes in New York. He had to spend time in, if anybody understands New York City or New York State prisons or watches Law and Order, he was in Dannemora, which is a renownedly awful prison on the Canadian border. He was there, if you recall, several years ago. At the time, those two guys escaped. If you remember that, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, those two guys who escaped from prison and were on the run for like a month. Maybe not, but some people will know that.
I don't remember it, no.
Well, Australia, I'm sure it wasn't a big deal, but people in New York will remember. But what do you think happened in the prison, like with the guards and whatnot, after, those guys escape and you're prisoners in there? So he's been all around, he's been living in there essentially one way or the other for 20 years.
That's right.
Lost his 20s and 30s. Those are the best years of your life.
So what's next? What's next for?
We have things that we are looking into that we're not really ready yet to publicly reveal, but
Sure.
we're looking into things, and we're always strategizing and planning, because again, this is a terrible conviction. And it's a terrible conviction on every basis. He's actually innocent of this crime. We all believe that. He certainly had his rights violated, whether you believe that or not. And it's not often that you get that, both of those. You get literally somebody was innocent who was railroaded by them, violating his rights to boot. It's like a double whammy of bad.
Has the Innocence Project and everything been have they grabbed onto John's case?
Well, yes. So the last time we had briefs in the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals, by the way, is the highest court in New York State. We don't call it
Right.
New York is ass backwards. The Supreme Court is the low-level trial court, which everyone would say, well, that should be the high court. But the Court of Appeals is the high one in New York. And when we had argument in that court a few years ago, we had what they call amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs, where other non-parties support the litigants. And you know what I'll actually do if you give me 1 second?
Sure.
I'm going to pull up, I'm sure I can find this not too long, the people who signed on in an amicus brief for him, which is about as strong as you can imagine. Let me see if I can just find it right away, because
Yeah, for sure.
well, amicus.
While you do that, I'm just going to share the screen to show.
Amicus memo. Oop.
So guys, this is Free John Giuca, the website. So this basically has everything about the case, documents, all the media articles, the story.
It's also just important. It's Giuca. Most people think it's GUI, but
it is.
It's Giuca.
Yeah. So there's heaps and heaps on here.
So
including
we had
documents for those that love documents, and the witnesses that I think we've talked about all of these. This is the jailhouse informant, John Oviedo, Lauren, who was John's girlfriend at the time, Albert Cleary. He's the guy that was with Angel over here. And Mark Fisher's body was found across the road from Albert Cleary's home. And this is Anthony. He's the one that is not as well as much spoken about, but
Anthony
Mark did tell us about him.
Yeah, they claim that John gave him the gun, but in the second hearing that we had, another jailhouse informant said Russo admitted he didn't give John the gun. It's crazy. I'm gonna find.
And I don't know as well. I know that there are. Well, you find that. This is Anna Siga Nicolazzi, which was this is the disgraced prosecutor. So there's heaps of info in here, guys, and you can sign up to stay informed as well. And John also did do a blog for a while. I don't know, he hasn't updated that for a while, but he does have a blog.
He has not updated that for a while, but he's a really good writer and used to write a lot of stuff on that. Wait, is this the brief, or is that? No, that's the other amicus brief. There were two, but I'm looking for. Well, I won't hold you hostage here as I'm sitting here looking.
No, that's okay.
But I mean, okay. It really is an impressive. It's funny because I just had to access this the other day for some reason, and of course now I can't find it. But anyway, but it had those types of organizations that were all signed on to this, as friend of the court briefs, saying that what they did to him is, just wrong.
Yeah. Well, if you find it, when you find it, I'd love to know.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to see that for sure. I really would. So I will post that website just for FYI. I'll post that and pin it to the comments after the stream, and also John's blog. I will post and pin to in the same in the description under the video. So I thought we'll open it up for questions. So if anybody's got any questions for Mark, and thanks, Doreen, so much for being in the chat. It's awesome that you came on.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I find it you know, it's a travesty, a complete travesty.
It's
And
real bad, and it's real bad.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And there's plenty of videos too and things where you can see John. He's
You had
beautiful.
witnesses, by the way. You had witnesses who lived, for example, the people that own the home who had the driveway where Mark Fisher's body was found. They heard literally and told the police this, that right before the shots were fired, they heard young people out there talking, including a female, a
Female
distinct
voice.
female voice. Now, this is right across from Cleary's home. And they said they heard car doors opening and closing. The neighbor next to them, after the gunshots were heard, looked out of her window and said she saw a car speeding away. None of this matches what they claim John told these witnesses. Do you think the DA called any of these witnesses at trial? No, because it would have blown their case up. Even though these were the most credible, disinterested witnesses, as opposed to these kids who were pressured and said, I heard this, and none of it made any sense.
It's very familiar. There's a lot of familiarities with what's happening with Karen Read. It's actually...
It is.
And it was one of the questions I had. I thought, let's go through, and we can do it another time if you'd like to, because it's, you know, the kind of where there are that crossover, you know, that it's uncanny, really.
Subconsciously, that's probably a lot of the interest I have in Karen Read is because of that. And of course, the other one is I'm from Massachusetts, and it's just locally, it's so, if you're from there, it's like, of course this is happening there. It's like the way the people are, the cast of characters. But I think that John's case has a lot to do with that.
What actually, while we're on that, so is it Judge Chun? Is that how is he still, is Judge Chun still?
So he's the chief judge of Brooklyn now. He was the judge who presided over the last two post-conviction hearings, and of course denied them both. The first one that he denied is the one that got reversed in a intermediary appellate court, and then got reversed back from the Court of Appeals. And then when we came back with additional evidence involving another jailhouse informant that they were doing things they shouldn't have done, he denied it again, and that's kind of the last court stuff.
And when was that?
I believe
like 21 or something, 2020?
I think 22 is the last time the courthouse door was proverbially slammed in our face.
Wow.
Yeah.
And actually, the only other question I had as well, because the prosecutors in New York are immune, right? From
they have immunity to the extent that they're acting in their prosecutorial function as opposed to investigating. What's interesting in this case is that the prosecutors were actually doing some degree of investigation, because again, John did not get arrested until December of 2004 for a crime that occurred in October of 2003. And the prosecutors were very involved in the investigation and doing investigative work. So there's no question that they are, in theory, exposed civilly in the event that there was a basis to bring a lawsuit. That doesn't mean there is or would, but their immunity would not necessarily protect them as it would in most cases.
Okay. Right. And so that's different, though? Is that different to many other states in the US?
So. I think it's a general principle of prosecutorial immunity that they get what's called qualified immunity. It's not absolute, but anything they're doing as lawyers, they get, you just can't come after them. But if they're acting like investigators, that's a quasi police function, and you can come after them for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's So you're in contact quite regularly with Doreen, I imagine?
All the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm laughing
Good.
at her in the chat. I'm like trying to get her to come on, but it's all right. Not tonight.
We'll do it again. I mean, as there's so many layers, there's so much, you can kind of bounce around, you know, the nearly 21 years that
Yeah.
he's been since this has all happened in terms of his conviction, right? So John, there's
Somebody's
so
asked
much.
if Nicolazzi's as corrupt as Lally. The conduct that we've exposed in Giuca is worse because we exposed it. I mean, Lally may very well have done things that are very bad, or he just may be boring and incompetent and disinterested. It's not really that story. I don't think has been told yet. I know what Nicolazzi did. We proved what she did. Courts have agreed with it, and the evidence of it is overwhelming. So I'm comfortable with what she did. Lally, we'll see. But I mean, that thing with the video in Karen's case, that's quite disturbing, and at least at this point would be the most interesting thing to see how that plays out, because how they could have presented that inverted video and not notified anyone is extraordinarily disturbing.
The inverted video, it's kind of like the tail light was Sean's baby. That is,
Well, it's so bad because not only did they invert the video, but what are the consequences? You flip the taillight. So now the right taillight is not showing. And of course, the theory would be you don't want to see the right taillight because it doesn't fit what Proctor and Yuri would be saying. And then also by flipping the car around, you can't see Proctor, who is kind of, right in
he's
the.
at the
That's
passenger
right.
side tail light. They all are, you know, they all
Right.
hover around that.
But by
But by
flipping the
flipping
video,
it,
you can't see it. That's right.
as the viewer, you kind of just think, oh, well, they're on the other
So
side of the
it's
car. This is the tail light, like,
right.
yeah.
It's not just that the video is inverted and oh, that's awful. It's if you go to the next level of it, you say this is really disturbing because they are concealing powerful evidence. And then there was a video that you might have seen the other day from Microdots, which is really good, by the way. That guy is like his work is,
Incredible.
I mean, it's
Love him.
really powerful. But that video, which is something I hadn't even thought of, which is how the hell does the wrong taillight look like the relevant taillight with the white light, and how
The
could
white
that?
light. Yes, I did see that.
And you start to wonder, did they, tamper with that to make? I mean, I don't know, but this is really disturbing stuff. But you do get you can't just presume that every prosecutor and every detective acts honorably. I mean, most do, but sorry to say, I've seen too many examples of, I mean, I think in Karen Reed's case, it's more the detectives, although, and perhaps the DA himself. And in John's case, it appears to be more the prosecutor for sure than the police. But it happens, and it happens more than you think. And if you Google or just do any research on wrongful convictions in Brooklyn, Charles Hines, you're going to get 8 billion hits, because the poster child of the New York wrongful conviction crisis, which kind of came into people knowing about this like 15 years ago in New York, it's all Charles Hines, Brooklyn cases. And from this time period, and John's case has all the indicia of a dirty 1990s, early 2000s Brooklyn DA, sketchy, unethical, and
But
that
he's out of office now, isn't he? That's kind of,
he's deceased now. But yeah,
he's just right.
But he finally lost in 2013. He was like DA for life, but finally enough people got fed up with what was going on in Brooklyn. And they finally threw him out. And then he was actually under again, like Karen Reed. The feds,
Again, like Morrissey, right? It's kind of like, surely they're going to have enough this time, because he's been in for years.
They never charged him, but they wrote a report. And what I found fascinating is, I guess I took sick pleasure in this. when the feds in the Eastern District of New York released their report and their findings, they released a whole series of exhibits that they were discussing. And there were exhibits of email traffic between Hines and some of his closest advisors freaking out about certain cases and what to do for the election. And 3 of them were mine. So I actually,
Wow.
yeah, one of them was John, and the Angel situation about how do we answer questions about how do we hire Angel. One of them was certainly the one we talked about in the beginning, the Ronald who sat in jail for a year for no reason at all, actually innocent. They had another guy's DNA and they just left him in jail. And I forget the third one, but so they had quite a track record. That's just really bad.
Really bad.
Yeah.
It's interesting, just while I've got you to Lally, we're talking about, is Nicolazzi and Lally. And
they're so different though.
I
they're
have not,
so different.
I have not seen Nicolazzi in action, but from what completely different. I mean, you've got Nicolazzi who wants to be a celebrity. She wants to be in the limelight. She's
a great speaker. She sounds intelligent. She's smooth. You look at Lally. The first time I looked at Lally is the opening statement, and I said, "What the hell am I watching? This can't be real." That's not Nicolazzi. She's a skilled lawyer. She just cut corners in this case, clearly. But if you saw her, you would say, she's polished, she's intelligent, she's skilled, she's charismatic. Where you look at Lally and you say he's the exact opposite of all of those traits.
That's right. And the reason I say that is because I have wrestled with whether or not Lally's in on this, right? Is he in on this? Because for so long I thought, and I've been following, the Reed case probably since early December. So, I watched pre-trial and everything, and I went through all of Turtle Boy's playlist and watched all of from April 23 and binged it. But he's so lackluster, and he's almost doesn't have what it would take to be purposely, like on purpose, corrupt, right? I feel like he's too.
I'm not giving him that pass. I don't know. But what I know is this. I know he's not the shot caller. That's Morrissey, and it begins and ends with him, and ultimately he's the one that has to pay for this. But you're a DA, ADA, not like the trial lawyer, and you get assigned this. When they got all those materials from the feds, and you saw Proctor's text messages, you saw the butt dials, you saw the Google searches, all that stuff. You saw the ARCA reports, which to me is like game over.
Game over.
What sane prosecutor at that point says, I'm satisfied that we have enough to go forward? You can't, in my view, be in the face of all that evidence unless you are able to somehow get rid of it and explain it. You can't ethically go forward. And start with the ARCA evidence. Look at their attempt to explain it. This clown Trooper Paul, who I said to somebody else the other night when they were saying, I feel sorry for him. I said, no, I almost feel sorry for him. I almost feel sorry for him because he looks like a lost puppy. He sounds like a lost puppy, but he was still willing to do her dirty. He was still willing to say whatever needed to be said, and he has to pay for it. So he ought to take the heat for that. He still agreed to do it, even though he has to know his opinion is not an opinion. It's all gobbledygook nonsense.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
DA said, I'm okay with that. I'm okay calling Proctor as a witness. That doesn't bother me. And then I'm going to have him say that, well, I was upset. I was emotionally upset. And you know what the problem with that is? The guy's a homicide detective. Okay. This is what he does. And this is not to demean John O'Keefe in any way, but when you're a homicide detective, there are varying degrees of shocking crimes. They're all bad. An innocent life is lost, that they're all equally bad, but there are sometimes different circumstances of bad. Like, for example, I mean, John O'Keefe is, well, if you accept that, if you believe that Karen Reed did it, which I don't, but if you did, you'd have to think, if you have half a brain, that it's some kind of tragic accident and she just left them there. I don't believe that, but that would make sense if you have to believe she did it. By homicide standards, that's not that bad. Again, I know that sounds terrible, but let me compare it to that Brian Walsh case.
Yeah, for sure.
Bad, okay? That's
Yeah.
like researching how to chop up my wife, how to
Yeah.
make it look like this, how to dismember her.
If
How
I
do
needed to.
I mean, this is so, but so now you go back to the point. This guy's testimony is, I did this because I was so upset what happened to John O'Keefe. By the way, 8 months later, which makes no sense. But it also begs the question, if you were that upset about John O'Keefe, surely you must have been upset about Brian Walsh, which is just a grotesque. And did you do the same thing? And did you text your buddies about that? And I hate to get all nasty about this, but Anna Walsh was a very attractive woman that he brutally, almost certainly murdered. We saw what Proctor was looking for with Karen Reed.
Yes.
Do we think he wouldn't do the same with a homicide victim if this
Was
guy
it, yeah.
Of course he would.
Of course
And,
he would. He
and did
probably did.
that's what I'm saying. And has he done it again and again? And they just didn't care and said, we're going to vouch for this guy and have him say, well, it was 8 months later and I was upset. So it's, but it doesn't mean he's corrupt. And it was his private phone, as if that makes it okay.
Yeah, exactly. What's the saying? Don't do about
So I think
integrity is being the same person that you would be when you think no one's watching,
right.
being the same, that same, that's integrity.
Public,
so if it's your private phone and you can't, doesn't mean that you're allowed to be a complete wanker, that doesn't mean that you can be a low life scum, because, and then you use your work phone and you're professional. It doesn't actually make you, it just makes you.
The point is that, so when you look at Lally, this is his fault. I mean, he agreed to do this. I mean, another example is they knew that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, on the same day, one day before the preservation letters went out, tossed their phones or, got new phone, however they want to phrase it. Now, if you're a prosecutor with a shred of integrity, you're not troubled by that. And you're just going to like shrug your shoulders. That's
it was just a coincidence. Yeah, complete coincidence.
Or Brian Albert, who, in the act of lovemaking with my wife, I somehow butt dialed Brian Higgins, who, in the most absurd testimony you'll ever hear, didn't answer the call, but then a minute later butt dialed him back. I mean, how are you not concerned? And do you not say, you guys are full of shit? And what are you covering up? I don't know what you did, but you're covering up something. So do I blame Lally for that? I do. I mean, a real prosecutor says, I don't want to be a party to this. But, they at least.
So, but is he just making the donuts though? Is he just, to me, it was kind of just here you go, Lally. Here's your next case. You're going to have to do it. And he just goes, okay, yes, boss. All right. And you know what I mean? Yeah. And he makes the donuts and he just goes in and he makes the donuts. Objection, like.
It's also crazy because no one has ever seen a prosecutor try a case of this magnitude and length by themselves. Now, like his partner, who's like, whatever, McLaughlin, is that her name?
McLaughlin,
just the law guy. That's the appeals nerd who's there, every now and then to make a legal argument. But to have him have to try the case by himself and literally clock in and make the donuts and go home, and then all you see him do is like, sucking on lung darts and, extra large coffees. I mean, honestly, as a human being, you start to worry about the guy's health and stress. But at the same token, he signed up for this and has no problem doing it. And I wouldn't do that. I mean, I don't know how he looks at himself in the mirror when he goes home at night and says, I'm doing the right thing, because he's not.
I know. And what does he do when he gets home, with what does he, oh, welcome home, honey. How was your day? Yeah, no, it was pretty good. Like, you just wonder how he looks at himself in the mirror, but
Oh. Can I
what
answer
he
this
thinks to
question?
himself when yeah, we will. Yeah,
No, I
absolutely.
don't think
Go for it.
Nicolai made a mistake. I think she intentionally and deliberately violated John's rights to get a conviction any way she could. So no, it was no mistake. It was intentional. It was unethical and outrageous. So my take is that she's no good. She didn't make a mistake.
Okay, we've got a few questions here now, so so this is a good one, and somebody asked it earlier. I don't know if it was Paige, but yeah.
They're not going to get involved right now in some. I mean, you can't have like every state conviction just sua sponte investigated by the feds. So that's not an option right now. It's an allegation of suppressing exculpatory evidence. It happens all the time. The feds don't do anything. The problem in the Karen Reed thing is that they're clearly looking at something much bigger than just Karen Reed. Like they have their corruption prosecutors, and they're looking at Morrissey. They're looking at the state police. They're looking at planting evidence, those kinds of types of crimes. So, but what they're not going to do is just generally get involved in a state murder case where a prosecutor is accused of, not disclosing evidence that, a jailhouse informant got a benefit. I mean, the way they look at it is it's not a crime. It's an ethical thing. They could get sanctioned, but that's not going to get, a federal investigation. Whereas in Karen Reed, the guys are like literally sprinkling taillight pieces. It feels like, all over the place. They're doing all kinds of other sketchy stuff. And I mean, God knows what the DA is doing, and God knows what else is being investigated. So it's a little different in that sense.
Right. Although I do, and it's just a hunch. I do believe that they came across Karen's investigation, or the investigation into Officer John O'Keefe's death, kind of by accident. I feel like they were looking at crossover cases, perhaps Sandra Birchmore or another one.
Well, I agree. I think again, the authorities were being looked at, and they kind of stumbled into this. And they're not there to solve a murder. I mean, they generally don't have jurisdiction over murder. They probably still are not going to have jurisdiction over John O'Keefe's death unless they were to create some absolutely huge RICO case, which they're not going to do. I mean, the racketeer influence and corrupt organization. I mean, that's what they use for the mafia. You can charge them with state crimes in a crazy RICO thing, but that I don't think that's what this is. That's a little dramatic, but I think it's a general corruption thing, and the John O'Keefe stuff is right in the center of it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty sure it's me, Josie, that Giuca's trial was not recorded, but they're not allowed in New York, are they?
Not really. Look, in New York, you can get some recording. They don't usually do gavel to gavel, and there are all kinds of New York civil rights laws where if a witness is subpoenaed, they have a right where it can't be filmed. New York has kind of gone back and forth in allowing this. I'm not sure if Karen Reed was in New York that you would be seeing what you're seeing. I don't think you'd be getting the gavel to gavel type of.
Yeah, right.
Which is interesting. I think New York, because it's, New York and the media capital and all that.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting.
But I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. If ever a case should have been televised, it was the New York Donald Trump case. I mean, just for public interest, right?
Yes.
And it wasn't, because that's just not what they do here.
Interesting. Another one from Paige. Yeah, so why make John the fall guy over the true killers? And I suppose that's one of the big questions, right?
It is. We've never really understood it. Russo turned them on to this ghetto mafia nonsense. They They found the blanket, and from that day, they had the tunnel vision and confirmation bias. And this has always been about get Giuca, which makes no sense. I mean, they were willing years ago, 5-6 years ago, to try to use Russo at a retrial, which is crazy. I mean, Russo is the bad guy here. There's no
Yes.
question. I mean, whatever they think of John, if he got out tomorrow and was walking around the street, nobody would be in danger. Okay. That's just not what this is. It never was. Russo, you would turn around and run the other way.
Yes.
Hope for the best. I mean, there's a difference here. And this idea that Russo was somehow looking up to John and was his little patsy, and he looked up to him as his, capo, and he was a
No.
little soldier, is so. If Russo, there were a million witnesses that the cops interviewed in this case who said Russo is an absolute psychopath. He runs around with a gun. He threatens to shoot people. He beats people up. Absolute lunatic back then.
Yeah. Just going through. We've got some talk. Yeah, you've got a fan base definitely happening. Someone said you had a lucky wife before.
I could say it. Thank you.
Not sure if we're talking as a crossover here between yeah, okay. So we've talked about the feds, attorney Bederow.
Somebody
100%.
Yeah, no, a book should have been written about. I should have kept like a diary for the last 14 years of this. Absolutely. And I remember
John should write a book.
I know he should. He really should.
Definitely.
He's a really good writer too. I mean, he's very emotional and like present in his writing. I don't know how to describe it more than that, but he's actually, he missed out on like traditional college and everything because of all this, but he's actually extremely intelligent.
Yeah, emotionally intelligent, right? And I have read some of his blog. I will post the link, guys, in the description, and I'll put it on X as well. I haven't read all of it because there's quite a lot on there. But yeah, he's beautiful. He's lovely. Oh, here. I don't know. Are you talking, Robin, about writing letters to John?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think anyone in his position likes to know that there's support and people believe in him and are willing to help. I mean, look, we take any help we can get. There are things that we're going to be looking into and investigating. And, it's very interesting in modern times with awareness and this kind of content, there are people who are willing to help. So,
yeah.
At the right time, we may seek that soon.
Yeah, good. And I mean, you've got a number of platforms with extraordinarily large audiences. Someone mentioned earlier before, you need to tell Turtle Boy about this, and Sean McDonough, and obviously, the young jerks, Mike, because too of the following of those platforms being so Karen Reid heavy, the crossover, it's remarkable.
There's been some discussion once when the whole Karen Reid thing moves on that, something has to fill that void, and, that this may do that. And because there are similarities.
I will definitely continue to cover it. And, I will do, I'd love to have Doreen on. She said that she would come on with me and tell her story, which is just that's super exciting and inspiring and all of the things. But I'll do some as well on my own where I just sort of tell a bit more of the story in the bits.
Yeah. Somebody has an interesting question, which also gives perspective in Karen Reid. They say, what does Mark Fisher's family think of this? And first of all, they are really decent people. And I've seen them at every court appearance, at every level of court, I mean, probably 50 times over the last 12 years, and they still wear it. You can see it. You know, they're really good, nice people, but they think he's guilty, and because that's what they've been led to believe for 20 years. And I don't think they can emotionally get past that. And that's why I keep saying, like, when people say, "Oh my God, what is wrong with Paul O'Keefe? And why does the mother act the way she does?" Because it's a lot easier to just take the narrative than think about the alternative, which is scary. And what if it's not solved, or what if we don't know? So, you know, families of murder victims usually are going to believe what the cops and DA tell them. And certainly if somebody gets convicted, they're not going to just be in the business of saying you're right. I mean, they're the nicest people. They've always been very respectful. But you can see it. They wear the anguish all these years later, every time you see them. And, they're very different than, they don't speak to the press. They politely decline. They're not like you saw with Paul O'Keefe. They're not inviting people to sit with them and all that kind of stuff. Very different, but people handle their grief or their beliefs, in their own way.
That's right. And I think regardless, and I'm thankfully not a victim of homicide, in my family, but you'd put that trust immediately into the prosecution, the DA, the cops. So yeah.
Yep.
Robert meant to write letters. Who can we write letters to help get him out, or to help state the case, I guess? So
we're talking about those kind of options. I mean,
cool.
His sentence is still in a position where I'm not sure it's literally the right time, but something is coming up soon where that may be an avenue. So we can certainly get back to that, because we want anything we can get.
Yeah, great. We'll keep us in the loop. I'll just go through and see if there's any more questions. Everyone's saying that, yeah, you need your own channel.
It's people say that all the time. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I've got a real life practice and things, and it's a lot easier to just do this and like schedule it, but without the pressure of like having to do it. And
you just turn up.
Right. And it's also, I don't have to plan it. I don't have to organize it. I don't have to deal with the business part of it and that kind of thing that all of you deal with. So, I mean, I got to tell you, I'm much happier to just be the guest, and then I don't have to deal with all that stress that comes with
the
it.
logistics and the
right.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Being strict
exactly
copyrights.
Next thing you know, they like shut you down. Right.
That's right. Yeah. It's maybe in the years to come, whatever will be around when you're looking down.
Maybe, but I'm still a working stiff most days. So
you are. You've got a lot on. You've got lots to do. Yeah. You've got lots to do. This was a question in regards to the Reed case. Do you think it's a coincidence that most LE guys in Karen's trial have been promoted recently, or since John O'Keefe's death, really?
No. I think it's part of the game, and I mean, you're dealing with, in Norfolk County, and I guess Canton in particular, it's incestuous. Everything, the law enforcement, even just the relationships between the Alberts, McCabe's, and other people. It's just it's so towny. That's kind of a Massachusetts expression, but it's the right word. It just feels like tiny little towns, but it's like suburban Boston in 2024. And it's hard to believe that in a major metropolitan area that's supposed to be a very sophisticated, area of the country, it feels like, Chinatown in that, Jack Nicholson sense.
Yes, yes. It's really, really bizarre from the outside looking in. I've never been to Massachusetts, and I want to come. There's been a couple of moments over the last 3 months where I've thought, no, stuff it. And I've opened up there and I've thought, I'm just booking a flight. I'm going.
Well,
I,
Boston's fun, and then you just you go down there and see the court area and drive by the old house where this happened. And by the way, that the yard is tiny. It's really misleading from what you see in court. I mean, a couple of months ago, I mean, I go to Boston all the time because I'm from there, and I just drove by there because I was eating 10 minutes away and said, I mean, I have to see this. And it's surprising how small that front yard is and how close that flagpole is to those bedroom windows. And I'm here to tell you, there is no way that a dog would not be barking at that. And there is no way that those two adults in that room would not be hearing a car slam in reverse and barrel into someone. Just or hear the sirens. No way.
yep. And aside from that point about nobody hearing the accident, especially when you've got everybody looking out the window at what they're doing. Why aren't they coming in? Where's John? Jen and Matt McCabe. One's at the window, one's at the door, and then you've got the Nagels coming, coming and going, and that all
It makes
happening.
no sense.
As I
They
said
should have
to
seen it. The Nagels should have seen the accident, I think, if the timeline is correct.
everybody would have at least heard it and then gone out to have seen Karen screech away and John laying on the ground.
That's the other thing, because the yard is so small. If he had been lying, not too far from the flagpole, if nothing else, the car lights going down the road would have hit the yard, and you would see a human being, because there wasn't that much snow. I mean, it hadn't really started to snow yet, so he would have been visible, and it was more grass than snow at that point, and it just makes no sense.
It makes no sense. It makes zero sense. And the sound, the impact of, as kind of horrible as it is, to the car hitting the body, there's no way that wouldn't have made a noise. And the noise loud enough to attract the attention of the partygoers right inside the house, in the front of the house.
Somebody else said something interesting to it. I'm not a car guy per se, but that engine is a V8, the big engine. And 24 miles an hour in reverse is actually really fast. When you go down your driveway and you think you're going fast in reverse, you're probably going like 7 or 8 miles an hour. I mean, you don't drive fast in reverse. Why would you?
No.
So to put a V8 car and floor it in reverse is probably going to make a very loud engine noise, a loud screeching. And then, of course, the impact, according to them, is so great to shatter a taillight made of polycarbonate, which, yeah, whatever. And then launch him 20 feet or whatever. The sound of that would be chilling, I would imagine.
It would be. It would be. I have heard, I don't know if you've ever heard in your neighborhood or out a car get hit by a cat or something get hit by a car, or a possum, and even that, you hear it. You hear the car stop. If the actual animal hits the front bumper of the car, you hear that. And that's a tiny animal, not a human being, a grown man. It just doesn't make sense.
Also, where he ends up makes no sense. I mean, he's essentially, for lack of a better term, in the middle of the lawn, getting hit on the side of the road. And there's just, how do you end up in the middle of the lawn? How do you end up with your head split in the back? And if the theory is, well, it could have been the curb, which is probably not the worst theory in the world, except for the problem, you're not going to bounce 30 feet. So that kind of wipes that out. None of this makes any sense. Look, I'm surprised that she wasn't acquitted in 30 minutes, but apparently she was acquitted on 2 counts anyway.
But me too.
Well,
I said 4 hours. That
yeah,
was my.
I
I
don't mean
said
30
4
minutes,
hours.
but this case is a no-brainer acquittal case. I mean, it's I mean, look, she's never going to get convicted. I don't even think she's going to get retried when all is said and done. But
I don't either, especially after all of this jury. These jurors coming forward, like
that never happens, by the way. That's the idea that jurors reach out in the way that they've done and there's been at least 4 of them so far, and according to the lawyers, all 12 would confirm if asked. I mean, this is insane.
it's going to be intriguing at the very least to see how Annie Bev responds.
It is, but even before you get there, to me, it's going to be interesting. How does the DA respond? I mean, again,
you think he'll publicly respond?
Well, they're going to have to file something and respond. They can't not respond to this, but given how awful they are, I would expect them to try to argue on procedural grounds. You shouldn't even hear this. But the point I'm making is, again, if you're a real prosecutor, whether you think Karen Reed is guilty or not, you have to at least be concerned when all these jurors are coming back. Forget the law for a minute. She may very well have been acquitted. Are you in the least bit concerned that you may be retrying a woman who was acquitted of murder for murder? Does that in the least bit bother you? It should.
It should. 100%, but they won't. They'll push back.
They won't. You're right. They're zombies and they don't care, apparently. So we'll see.
Good one.
That's an interesting one.
You probably need to do it now because I think he's going. He's going to be busy. Yeah. I think he said the other day on X that he's been. I think he's just signed with somebody else. I can't remember the details or if he even shared them, but he's got So
I feel
maybe
I feel like I know what you're talking about. I forget what it was, but it's something we've heard of, I think.
Yeah, which is awesome.
So he's great.
Yeah. So maybe you should just do a bit of a hey Richie, let's do a pop me down tentatively. That'd be great. It'd be really great.
Yeah, no.
He's amazing.
He is really good.
And it would be incredible to have. Yeah, you really should write that down. You've just written it. I think
look, we're open to everything, believe me.
Good one, Brazilian babe. I agree with you. I think that's a fantastic idea. Doreen, we can fill you in on Microdots. Actually, if Doreen, you just go to Microdots channel on YouTube. He's incredible, so very talented. Let's have a look. Yeah, so if Denny Chun doesn't step down, then John's suffering continues. So I wonder how. He's not very old, right? Is he very old? Like, is that something that's going to be happening?
He's old. I mean, no, he's probably late 50s, early 60s.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so not old. It's not like.
Not in judge years, right? I mean, he's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
They know. They know this is a bad conviction. They all know. Believe me. They know.
Does New York City have anyone comparable to Turtle Boy?
I don't know. I have to think about that. I mean, look, New York City is the media capital of whatever. Turtle Boy is a pretty unique guy. He did a lot of like local muckraking about all kinds of interesting things. And then he found this and blew it wide open. I never thought of that, but there's got to be somebody. If not, I'll just ask him. He would know, right?
I think Turtle Boy, if he wanted to take it on, which I imagine, he would at least cover it 100%.
I don't know. It's not Boston, so I don't know how usually he stays local, but again, if there's got to be somebody who covers, New York on this kind of level. I mean, look, the media is different. When this case was in the news, and even 10 years ago, when this had a lot of interest, the media platforms are so different now that we didn't have this. I mean, this kind of exposure didn't exist.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and we need to leverage it, don't we? So
Yeah,
100%.
no, this one is interesting. There's no question that people would be fascinated by this.
Yes, exactly. J. Ray, I'm assuming, is speaking about 34 Fairview. Is the yard sloped?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think so. And if it is, it's not a heavy. I mean, it's not like a steep yard. It's just, I don't think so, but I don't remember. And if I don't remember, then it can't be, that out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
I didn't get out of the car. I mean, I'm not like, it wasn't like
Did you do a reenactment? Did you try and do reverse in 24?
Not at all. I drove by, looked, didn't even stop, didn't gawk, just looked and immediately said, wow, that's a lot smaller than I had seen in the pictures that the DA introduced, which
and everybody said that.
Yep.
And how about, so you didn't run up and go on the front patio?
I didn't do the coffin dapper.
No, everybody has said that, right? That, it's very deceiving. And the other thing that the DA did is all of the photos that they showed, not only were they poor quality, like just so embarrassing for them to. I mean, my 8-year-old could take better photos on his iPad. Like, it's just no excuse. Ridiculous. But also the photos were all, mounds of snow up by the house, which completely is not indicative of what it was like. Probably, well, definitely when the accident occurred, but certainly up until, I reckon, Saturday afternoon, which is, yeah.
It's so, all of it is just
misleading.
I mean, you'll never see a case where the cops tell you with a straight face that we just drove by every day looking for evidence to reveal itself, and it did.
Just on your way to work and back, guys, if you're happy to take a detour just to see if any of that evidence reveals itself.
Isn't it amazing how the Alberts never found any after the first 3 days? They never went out there to look themselves. That's interesting.
And Brian was asked on the stand, did you go out there and look? And he said no.
No, he wasn't.
Why not?
Interested.
Well, I didn't see any need. There was no need. The police were looking after it. Like, come on, mate.
We're on it. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. How many exactly? The amounts. Yeah. Luck, and that's why Lucky didn't see him. Mother Justice is John's mother, Susan. Yes.
Yes, she is.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just see if we've got any last questions. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to?
No, because it's like information
overload.
this is the kind of thing where you could talk about this for 17 hours straight. It's probably enough for, one day, but there's a lot more here. We've only really scratched the surface with this thing, and that's why there's so much online to look at and transcripts and everything I was telling you about, not just media stuff. And you'll see that this is bad. That's not hyperbole. This is bad.
It's bad. Yeah. So I'll put that website up again, which is where you'll find. So all the transcripts are there, are they?
I think so. Yeah. And if not, I mean, I'm pretty sure that all the stuff is up there, and there's plenty of ways to get everyone, briefs, transcripts, letters, exhibits. I mean, it's not hard.
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, cool. So there is as well, and I'll post all of these links, the ones that I'm aware of, as I said, in the description or in the comments of this stream. But there's 2020, I think it's a 6 or 7 part 2020 show, which is like 6 or 7 separate videos on YouTube. You can watch it.
Yeah, they
which
broke it
is
up into chunks, I think. We did 2 full hour episodes of 2020, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah.
right. And I think it's called, is that one called Undercover Mother, or
The first one is, and then I don't know what they called the second one, unless they just used the same name, but they were like several months apart.
cool. And there's the Dr. Phil episode.
Right.
You can
Yeah,
actually see, pardon?
I'm saying that should be available online somewhere too, I would imagine.
Yeah, again, it's cut up in chunks unless you've got, access to it on some, Dr. Phil. But
Right.
you can watch it in chunks. But there is plenty, and it's John Giuca, Giuca. But as I said, I'm going to keep kind of covering it and over here, and I'll just quickly run through them and see if there's any questions that I've missed. Are you talking about the kangaroo? It's hilarious, isn't it?
Never seen a real kangaroo. They don't just like walk around, right? That's not.
Well, they hop, but
well, right. They hop and put their little. But I mean, are they like in the wild? Like we have deer here that they're just all over the place.
So this is actually my friend Nick, and ex-colleague, and he lives about 5 minutes up the road and backs onto bushland. And Nick has a family of kangaroos that live behind his house that he used to always tell me about. Hopefully they're all still there.
They're dangerous,
but yeah,
right?
so
don't they punch? Like they're boxers, right?
Big ones. The big ones are like that kind of live, the foresters, and then the big reds, which are more inland. But the grey foresters, I mean, I've never seen them fighting. The smaller ones that kind of live around here, I live right near the beach. I've never seen one here, but yeah, a few minutes up the road. Yeah, they live in the bush.
How big are they?
I don't know, like. And even then, I'm going to tell you in.
You're going to tell me like in meters, aren't you?
A meter and a half. Yeah, I don't know, like how many feet? Maybe like 6 foot-ish. But they're like big ones, and they probably go from like 3 or 4 foot generally. But yeah, I mean, I've patted them, and not in the wild, like at zoos and.
And do they really hop around with their little ones in the pouch?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The joeys in the pouch. Yes, they do. Yeah. Yeah. So they're very cute. And the reason I kind of called my channel True Crime Kangaroo is because I wanted to kind of have the Australian. I wanted everyone to know that I was from Australia, but not be. And then I was, covering true crime, but not be Aussie true crime or, True Crime Australia, because it kind of then would indicate that I'm only covering Aussie true crime, and we don't have that much.
Well, kangaroo will do it, because that's about as Australian as it gets, I would think.
Yeah, that's right. So, yes, and I will put microdots in there too. Let's have a look. Well, that's an interesting one. How did the press treat John's case over the years?
Terribly to start. He was the grid kid killer in the ghetto mafia gang. When we started getting involved in exposing things, it turned dramatically. I mean, I think at this point, the consensus of anyone is that he was wrongfully convicted, but for years he was just, a gang thug killer. That's just the way media is, but
that's right. Well, look at Karen, even now it's still a struggle to because that's the story to spin. That's the headline grabbers. That's where people click, the grid kid killer. And he was.
Yeah, he was just a gang, and Mark Fisher is as sympathetic a victim as you would ever see. I mean, he was the perfect son,
Yes.
and just first time in the
First
city.
time out in the city. Yeah,
Horrible.
yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, Lola. Oh, we have a
Tim,
guest.
Florida Tim, hello. Yes, Judy Ron would be great to look into this.
Come here. Oh, you want to come up? Nope. Oh, I thought the dog was coming.
Oh,
Nope.
is that Lola?
That is Lola. You want to come up, Lola? Oh, maybe she'll.
She's got her cone off now?
Here you go.
Oh, look at her.
I'll tell you what, come on up. Let's come up. You want to come up? There you go. There you go.
Oh, look at her.
She's like, it's late. Put me out. I want to go to bed.
She's so cute.
Yeah, the other one doesn't like to come in here so much. She likes her other side of the house. Lola likes to come in and I think she's like half asleep. Are you awake?
She looks very relaxed.
She is.
You ready for bed, Lola? You want to go to bed?
This is her way of saying, take me out to pee and I want to go to bed.
Enough's enough. Enough's enough, Dad. That's right. Okay. Oh, good. Oh, that's good. So, yeah, I was saying she's, because she had a cone on last time I saw her.
Yes, she's a good girl. Yeah, oh, God, when she had the cone of shame, yeah.
It's so horrible, isn't it, when they've got it on? You feel so mean, but it's...
My God. And they bump into the walls. They have, like, no balance. Or she's coming down the steps and it's scraping the steps.
And
so
they've got no because they can't, their whiskers can't, they can't, they've got no sense of direction, and they bump into the door when they go outside.
Isn't that awful? Yeah, she's on the floor right here now. Anyway,
this is, I'm just quickly trying to say, Mark, I've been dying to clarify meaning of regional administrative judge as Bev is for Norfolk County. Doesn't she oversee all the judges in that county?
I believe she does, but I'm not entirely familiar with how they do it in Massachusetts. No, but I think she's the judge out there, I believe.
Right. Cool. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to scroll through and see if there's any questions. Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Copa. Yeah, everyone, if you've enjoyed tonight, my channel's only new. I kind of went out on a whim and thought I'll ask, like the hottest trending New York City attorney if he'll come and talk with me. And he can only say no, so it's like, yeah, but thanks so much. I'd love for you to subscribe and.
Yeah, no, and look, people need to learn about this, so happy to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, and I will continue to cover it too. Yes, Crawl Space podcast, definitely. They're on YouTube as well. That's where I listen to them. They've got.
I've spoken to those. Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to that one. Yeah. Yeah, I've listened to that one. So Erin keeps saying look into Richard Allen in Delphi. I did follow that. I've kind of gone off that a little bit, kind of got a little bit weird. Kangaroo. Oh, a mob. Nick said, so he's still got, is that what they're called? A mob of kangaroos. I don't know that.
A mob?
A mob must be what they're officially called. Are they violent? Yeah, I mean, I guess. They're known to fight, like the boxing kangaroos. Oh, there you go. They've just had more babies, Mark.
Oh, wow. Right? They're Joeys?
They've had more Joeys. The mob of kangaroos have just had more Joeys, yeah.
Oh, God, a mob of Joeys.
Wow. They will F you up. You were kicked by one as a kid when you were feeding it. Yeah, you've got to be careful. There you go, 6 foot plus. The ones that, yeah.
Yeah, that's big.
Booba, I live in Tassie. Yeah, whereabouts? I lived in Tassie for a little bit too. They're everywhere in Tassie. Lots of them in Tassie. The deer of Australia, that's right, 100%. Because if you hit them with your car, your car does more damage than, I mean, it does more damage to your car than it, so I think it's very similar to deer kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Another Aussie, Cherie. She lives in Victoria. There's plenty of them on their hind legs. They average about 5 foot. The big one's 7 foot.
Jeez.
Okay.
He's a
So,
journalist in New York. Yeah.
all right. I think
Yeah. I need to take Lola out and I think get some rest myself.
good. Yeah. Well, it's been 2.5 hours. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Hope you're feeling better, and let us know what we can do to help.
I will. Appreciate
And
it.
we'll have you on again.
Sure.
I'd love to.
Great. Okay.
Cool.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Mark. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Good night. Bye.